So welcome to part 5. So as we'll see, the best way to begin developing our ability to reason well is to pay attention to the forms of good and bad arguments. Some of the reasons why we should focus on the form of argument are straightforward. Formal logic allows us to avoid the distractions of emotion, vague language, and strong habitual associations in arguments by focusing only on the structure of the argument. So our ability to reason correctly, as we've seen, is susceptible to all kinds of negative influences from our psychological and social situation. And reflecting on the form of an argument rather than on its content is a way of protecting our reasoning from these distractions. So emotions, prejudice, vagueness, and habit all have their place in ordinary life, and they're not necessarily bad in themselves. However, they can easily impede us in the pursuit of excellent reasoning. So as we'll see, the exercise of eliminating most of the non-logical features of an argument and looking as closely as possible at the form of the argument is a useful antidote to these distractions. So, and it turns out that much of the interest in formal logic is that it allows us to study the forms of arguments without having to worry about their content or their meaning. And logicians, of course, they're not going to always be able to tell us whether a statement is true or false, but they can often tell us whether the arguments have the right form. So one of our first tasks as we study logic is to become familiar with this idea of the form of arguments. So the first step, as we've seen, involves separating our usual concern for truth and falsity from our concern with the form of the argument. So for example, if we consider an argument composed of a string of true sentences, like let's say, Neil Armstrong was an astronaut and Sally Ride was an astronaut, therefore NASA decommissioned the space shuttle, each of those sentences are true, but it's obviously a bad argument. Bad argument composed of true sentences. So the problem with an argument like this is a problem of form and not a problem of having to do with the truth of the content. So the conclusion, we say, doesn't follow logically in this argument from the premises. And while there are many ways for an argument to be good, the special focus of our study here in part 5 of the course is the formal feature of the argument. So the formal strengths and weaknesses of an argument will concern us primarily here. As we saw previously, many arguments fail because of their form. We saw that in the previous part. In this part, we'll explore what it means for an argument to be formally correct and formally incorrect. So here's a formally correct argument built of false sentences. So Paris is south of Turin. Turin is south of Cairo. Therefore, Paris is south of Cairo. So this is the reasoning here is formally correct, even if the premises are false. So if the premises of this argument had been true, then the conclusion would have to be true. So as we shall see in great detail, this is the mark of formally correct reasoning. The mark of formally correct reasoning is that it can't take us from true premises to false conclusions. However, formal correctness doesn't guarantee that the premises of an argument are true. Philosophers will use the term valid to indicate that an argument is formally correct. So we'll explore the concept of validity in great deal later in part 6. The first point to notice is that validity is purely a matter of the form of an argument. A valid argument is one whose form is such that it's impossible for the premises of the argument to be true and the conclusion of the argument to be false. So in a valid argument, if the premises are true, the conclusion must be true. By contrast, we say that an argument is sound if it has true premises and is valid. So it's important to distinguish soundness and validity, as we saw in part 1. So from a logical point of view, a failure in the form of arguments, this is going to be simply devastating for an argument. As we'll see, this kind of failure will doom an argument, even if it's a highly persuasive argument, and even if this defective argument is presented in support of a contention, a conclusion that happens to be true. So in the remainder of the course, we're going to be looking at the formal characteristics of argument, and this will occupy us more than any other topic for the rest of the